Imagine sipping vintage champagne while floating in zero gravity, knowing that just inches away a lethal vacuum is trying to get in. At $25 million a night, this is not a hotel. It's a pressurized gold cage orbiting Earth at 17,000 miles per hour. And here's the part nobody talks about. The guests aren't astronauts. They're hedge fund managers, tech billionaires, and inherited wealth. People whose biggest adventure before this was a private island. Now they're strapped inside a machine where a single cracked window means instant death. So what does $25 million actually buy you up there? And more importantly, how on Earth, or rather above it, does any of this actually work? We are dissecting the engineering madness keeping these high-pressure dreams alive in 2026. Buckle in. Before we talk about the champagne and the zero-gravity spa, we need to talk about the shell that keeps everyone alive, because the architecture of this hotel is unlike anything ever built. The station is modular. Think of it as a series of pressurized aluminum and carbon composite cylinders clipped together in orbit like an extremely expensive Lego set. Each module was launched separately, assembled robotically, and stress-tested to survive micrometeoroid impacts traveling at speeds 10 times faster than a bullet. And micrometeoroids are not a hypothetical. They are constant. Tiny fragments of rock and debris, some no bigger than a grain of sand, are perpetually orbiting Earth at orbital velocity. Hit the wrong panel and you've got a hole the size of a thumb. What sits between that hole and the guests? Multiple layers of Whipple shielding, an outer bumper that vaporizes the debris, a gap that disperses the energy, and an inner hull that absorbs what's left. But here's where things get even stranger. The windows, the panoramic views marketed in the hotel brochures, those sweeping 360-degree shots of the planetary curve that look like God's own screensaver, those windows are made of synthetic sapphire, not glass, sapphire. It's one of the hardest transparent materials on Earth, engineered to resist both micro-impacts and the extreme thermal cycling of passing in and out of sunlight 16 times a day. 16 sunrises. Every single day. And the interior isn't just nice for a spacecraft. These suites have variable lighting that mimics golden hour on request, acoustic dampening panels so you don't hear the constant hum of life support machinery, and climate zones where every room can be individually tuned. Think of it as a high-altitude Four Seasons, except the minibar is restocked by drone. Now, here's the detail that nobody expected when this was first announced. The hotel has centrifugal gravity zones. Certain sections of the station slowly rotate, using centrifugal force to simulate partial gravity, roughly a third of Earth's. That's the dining hall. That's where the Michelin-caliber chef prepares a 5-course tasting menu. Guests eat in partial gravity. Food stays on the plate, wine stays in the glass, then retire to their zero-G sleeping pods for the night. It sounds like science fiction. The engineering to actually pull it off, that's where it gets almost incomprehensibly complicated. Let's talk about what the experience is actually like, because this isn't just a technical exercise, it's a product, and the people spending $25 million per night have extremely high standards. Every suite is paired with a bespoke AI concierge. Not a chatbot, but a system that has been trained on the guests' preferences, dietary restrictions, communication style, and aesthetic taste before they even launch. By the time they arrive, the concierge already knows they prefer single-origin Ethiopian coffee, that they need total darkness to sleep, and that they'll want Beethoven playing softly when they wake up to their 14th sunrise of the day. The sensory experience is engineered as much as the structure. Ultra-high-definition screens line the walls of the observation lounge, but most guests quickly abandon them, because the real view, the actual Earth, blue and white and impossibly vivid, hanging in absolute black, makes every screen look fake. Former guests describe it as watching every movie you've ever loved, and then realizing none of them were real. But here's the part the brochure glosses over. The human body was not designed for this. Skin starts losing moisture rapidly in the recycled, pressurized cabin air. Without gravity, fluids in the body shift upward. Guests develop what's called puffy face syndrome within hours, and a persistent nasal congestion that makes everything smell slightly metallic. Taste changes in microgravity too, which is why the chef has reformulated every dish with intensified seasoning. What tastes perfect on Earth can taste like cardboard at orbital altitude. The zero-gravity spa treatments, and yes, those exist, are specifically engineered around these biological realities. Hydration therapies, lymphatic massage adapted for fluid redistribution, UV treatments to counteract the artificial lighting. The spa isn't a luxury add-on. It's practically medically necessary. And then something unexpected happens. Something that guests consistently report as the most valuable part of the entire experience. Not the food, not the spa, not the engineering marvel they're living inside. It's what astronauts call the overview effect. At some point during their 14-orbit stay, nearly every guest experiences a profound, disorienting psychological shift. Looking down at Earth from that altitude, watching borders disappear, watching weather systems curl across continents, watching city lights bloom across the dark side of the planet, something breaks loose in the brain. The triviality of earthly concerns becomes visceral. Multiple guests have described coming back fundamentally different people, and the hotel knows this. They don't just sell the champagne, they sell the transformation in their marketing materials. The overview effect is listed as an amenity. That's either the most honest thing a hotel has ever said or the most cynical. Now let's talk about where that money actually goes. Because 25 million sounds like pure profit margin until you start breaking down what it actually costs to run a hotel in low Earth orbit. Fuel. First, launching a single kilogram of payload into low Earth orbit costs, even with modern reusable rockets, somewhere between $1,000 and $3,000 per kilogram. The fresh organic produce, the vintage burgundy, the Egyptian cotton linens that get swapped out every 48 hours, every gram of it is a line item on a launch manifest. A single bottle of wine destined for this hotel has a launch cost attached to it. The hotel's weekly resupply drone doesn't just carry oxygen scrubber cartridges and toilet paper. It carries truffle oil, fresh flowers, and replacement OLED panels. But here's where things get even stranger. The automated resupply drones are themselves a marvel. They launch on a schedule calculated 18 months in advance, timed to orbital mechanics with millisecond precision. Miss the window and you don't just delay a delivery. You wait for the next launch opportunity, which could be days. The hotel maintains a buffer of consumables large enough to sustain guests for 3 weeks without resupply. Just in case. The oxygen scrubbing system deserves its own conversation. The station uses a hybrid system, electrolysis to reclaim oxygen from water, combined with chemical carbon dioxide scrubbers that have to be replaced on a rolling schedule. Every breath taken in that suite has been processed, filtered, and re-oxygenated by machinery running 24 hours a day. If that machinery fails, the emergency protocol kicks in. Bottled oxygen reserves can sustain the full guest roster for 36 hours, which is more than enough time to evacuate, but still, you are breathing recycled air in a pressurized can, and someone has calculated exactly how long the backup supply lasts. And then there's waste. In orbit, nothing disappears. Human waste, food waste, packaging, spent filters, all of it gets processed, compacted, and either stored for return on resupply missions or incinerated during atmospheric re-entry. The carbon offset program attached to this hotel involves direct air capture partnerships and reforestation credits measured in the thousands of tons. Whether that makes the ethics clean is a different question. Here's something the marketing team would prefer you didn't think too hard about. Every single person aboard that hotel is one equipment failure away from dying in a way that has no parallel in any other hospitality context, and the safety architecture built around that reality is extraordinary and quietly terrifying. The emergency evacuation craft are always docked. Always. 2 dedicated re-entry capsules, each capable of carrying the full guest and crew complement, are attached to the station at all times. They don't wait for a crisis. They're pre-positioned, pre-pressurized, and pre-programmed. In the event of a hull breach, a fire, or a catastrophic system failure, guests can be strapped in and deorbiting within 90 minutes. 90 minutes. That's shorter than most domestic flights, and it's the maximum. Drills are run during onboarding, before the guests are even shown their suites. But here's the threat most people forget about. The sun. Solar flares, sudden eruptions of electromagnetic and particle radiation from the sun's surface, can spike cosmic radiation levels to lethal doses in minutes. Earth's magnetic field protects us on the surface. In low Earth orbit, that protection is thinner. The hotel has dedicated solar event shielding, a combination of polyethylene-based radiation barriers and strategically placed water tanks, because water is one of the most effective radiation shields that exists. When a solar event is predicted, and space weather forecasting has become remarkably accurate, guests are directed to the station's storm shelter, a heavily shielded central module with no windows, and enough supplies to wait it out. It is, reportedly, the least aesthetically pleasing room on the station. Now, the guests themselves. You cannot simply buy a ticket to this hotel the way you'd book a suite at the Ritz. Every guest completes a rigorous pre-flight protocol. Cardiovascular stress testing, hypoxia tolerance evaluation, centrifuge training to acclimatize the body to G-forces during launch and re-entry, and psychological evaluation, not to screen out the mentally unfit, but to identify anyone at risk of claustrophobia, anxiety spirals, or inability to follow emergency instruction under pressure. Because in orbit, a panicking billionaire is a hazard. The most surprising part wasn't the medical screening. It was what one hotel spokesperson said publicly, that several high-profile prospective guests were turned away not for health reasons, but because they failed the psychological profile. The ability to remain calm in an environment of controlled existential risk is apparently not something money can buy. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because this hotel is not the destination, it's the proof of concept. The engineers, investors, and aerospace companies behind this project are not primarily interested in serving ultra-wealthy tourists. What they're building using the revenue from $25 million nights is the infrastructure for something far larger. The commercial case for orbital manufacturing is extraordinary. Certain materials and pharmaceuticals can only be produced in microgravity. Crystalline structures that form in space are impossible to replicate on Earth. Fiber optic cables manufactured in zero gravity are dramatically purer than anything producible terrestrially. The first orbital factory, when it comes online, will almost certainly be located near or docking with a commercial space station. And the luxury hotel proved that long-duration human presence in orbit is commercially viable. By 2030, the roadmap includes mid-tier orbital tourism at price points designed for the merely wealthy rather than the ultra-wealthy. The target is to bring the cost of a night in orbit below $1 million by 2032. Rough estimates suggest that's achievable with scale, reusability improvements, and competition between at least 3 rival commercial stations expected to launch before 2029. The Lunar Transit Hub conversation is more speculative, but it's happening. A permanent cislunar way station, a facility between Earth and the Moon, becomes significantly more viable once the orbital infrastructure and human factors knowledge base built by this hotel matures. But there's a debate that gets louder the more this industry grows. The celestial commons. The concept that space belongs to all of humanity, enshrined in the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, is being quietly stress-tested. When a private corporation builds a hotel in low Earth orbit, charges $25 million a night, and uses that revenue to develop proprietary manufacturing infrastructure in space, who does that serve? The argument in favor is the classic innovation argument. Luxury patronage funds the frontier, and the frontier eventually benefits everyone. The supersonic jet began as a prestige product. The smartphone began as a toy for the wealthy. The argument against is that this frontier, unlike previous ones, was never anyone's to claim. Whether the orbital economy that follows is equitably structured, or whether it becomes an extension of the same wealth concentration that built this hotel, that question remains genuinely open, and it may be the most important question of the next century. So here's the final number. $25 million a night sounds obscene, and by any ordinary measure, it is. But strip away the price tag, and what you're actually looking at is the most complex hospitality operation in human history. A machine that sustains human life in an environment evolution never prepared us for, while simultaneously making that experience feel like a hotel. The champagne is real. The sunrises are real. 16 of them every single day. The overview effect is real, and so is the vacuum. 5 inches away, waiting patiently. The guests who come back, and they do come back, describe not just a trip, but a recalibration. A visceral, bone-deep understanding that the Earth is small, that everything on it is fragile, and that the border between surviving and thriving, even at the edge of the atmosphere, comes down to engineering, preparation, and the stubborn human refusal to accept that some places are off-limits. We built a hotel in orbit. Whether that's the most audacious achievement in the history of commerce, or just the most expensive proof that inequality has no ceiling, might depend entirely on what we build next.